In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a legend that even the most advanced alien species whisper about in hushed tones. It speaks of a human warrior whose very presence on a battlefield could turn the tide of wars that had raged for centuries. But this is not a story about glory or conquest. This is about Captain Sarah Chen, a woman who carried the weight of 1,000 battles etched into her flesh, hidden beneath armor and careful clothing choices, living with secrets that could either save or damn the entire galaxy. What happens when the universe's most feared warrior discovers that her greatest enemy isn't an alien armada or a cosmic threat, but the truth about herself? What happens when the scars she's spent years hiding become the key to humanity's survival? And what happens when fate decides that a broken soldier must become something far greater than she ever imagined possible? Sarah thought she could hide forever. She was wrong. The galaxy had other plans, and those plans would force her to confront not just her past, but the terrifying possibility that everything she believed about herself, about humans, and about the war that shaped her might be a lie. In a universe where species judge worth by strength and humans are considered the weakest link, one woman's journey to acceptance will either elevate humanity to unimaginable heights or destroy everything she's fought to protect. The scars tell a story. But whose story is it really? Captain Sarah Chen stood before the mirror in her quarters aboard the human flagship Defiance, methodically applying the synthetic skin patches that had become as much a part of her morning routine as brushing her teeth. Each patch covered a scar, each scar told a story she refused to share. The largest one, running from her left shoulder down to her elbow, required 3 overlapping patches. That one came from the Battle of Kepler 442b, where she'd held a defensive line against Vortak shock troopers for 18 hours straight. The reflection staring back at her looked almost normal now. Almost human, she thought with bitter irony. Without the patches, she resembled something between a warrior and a walking battlefield map. 37 major scars, countless smaller ones, and that was just what showed above her clothing line. The real damage lay hidden beneath her uniform, a constellation of violence that she'd earned over 15 years of frontline service in humanity's desperate war for survival. A soft chime interrupted her preparations. "Captain Chen, you're requested in the briefing room immediately," came the voice of Lieutenant Morrison, her aide-de-camp. Sarah noticed the slight tremor in his voice. After 3 months serving under her, Morrison still couldn't hide his nervousness around her. Most humans reacted that way, and aliens were even worse. Her reputation had grown beyond her control, becoming something larger and more terrifying than the woman who actually lived it. "On my way," she replied, pulling on her dress uniform jacket. The fabric settled over her patches seamlessly, hiding everything that made her who she was. Sometimes she wondered if she was hiding the scars from others or from herself. The corridors of the Defiance bustled with activity as she made her way to the briefing room. Human crew members pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, their eyes following her with a mixture of awe and fear. Word of her presence on any ship spread quickly, and with it came the stories. How she'd single-handedly eliminated a Zolothian battle group at the Proxima station. How she'd walked through plasma fire on Titan's surface like it was morning drizzle. How she'd stared down a Krillian warchief and made him blink first. What they didn't know was that each of those victories had cost her pieces of herself, literally and figuratively. The plasma fire had melted the left side of her torso. The Zolothian battle group had required her to detonate explosives while she was still in the blast radius. The Krillian warchief had only backed down after she'd shown him scars that proved she'd survived what no other being in the galaxy had ever endured. The briefing room fell silent as she entered. Admiral Harrison sat at the head of the polished metal table, flanked by his senior staff and 3 beings she didn't recognize immediately. No, that wasn't quite right. She knew the species, just not these particular individuals. A Zephyrian, tall and ethereal with skin that shifted through subtle color changes. A Kaldorian, massive and rock-like, whose very presence seemed to make the room feel smaller. And something she'd never seen before, humanoid but clearly not human, with features that seemed almost familiar yet distinctly alien. "Captain Chen, thank you for joining us," Admiral Harrison said, gesturing to an empty chair. "I'd like you to meet our guests from the Galactic Coalition. Ambassador Zeltar of the Zephyrian Collective, General Thokmor of the Kaldorian Empire, and..." He paused, glancing at the unknown being.
Professor Kane of the Archaeological Survey Corps.
Sarah nodded politely to each, noting how their expressions changed as they took her measure. The Zephyrian's skin flickered through what she recognized as fear patterns.
The Kaldorian's massive frame tensed, ready for combat.
But the one called Kane simply stared at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Captain, Admiral Harrison continued, our guests have brought us information about a discovery that could change everything we know about this war.
Professor Kane, if you would?
Kane stood, moving with an odd grace that seemed almost human but not quite.
Captain Chen, I must say it's an honor to meet you. Your reputation precedes you throughout the galaxy. What I'm about to share with you may come as something of a shock. Sarah remained silent, waiting.
In her experience, beings who prefaced their statements with warnings about shock usually had good reason. 3 months ago, our archaeological team discovered ruins on a dead world at the edge of the Void Sector.
Ancient ruins, far older than any known civilization.
Carbon dating suggests they're over 50,000 years old.
But that's not the shocking part.
Kane activated a holographic projector, filling the air above the table with images of massive stone structures covered in intricate carvings. The language on these ruins, Captain.
We've seen it before.
Not the exact words, but the underlying linguistic structure, the syntax, the mathematical principles behind the grammar.
Kane's eyes fixed on Sarah. It's human.
The silence that followed was deafening.
Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's impossible. Humans have only had spaceflight for 200 years.
We've only been in this sector for 50.
That's what we thought too, Kane replied. But the evidence is undeniable.
These ruins were built by beings with human linguistic patterns, human mathematical concepts, human architectural principles.
More than that, we found something else.
The holographic display changed, showing a chamber deep within the ruins. At its center stood a statue, weathered by age but still recognizable.
It depicted a warrior, clearly human, covered in intricate patterns that looked like. Sarah's blood ran cold.
Scars, she whispered.
Not just any scars, Kane said softly.
Battle scars. Arranged in patterns that tell stories. The being who built this civilization, who these people worshipped as their greatest hero, was a human warrior marked by countless battles. A warrior whose scars were considered sacred enough to carve in stone for 50,000 years.
Admiral Harrison leaned forward. Captain, there's more. Show her the inscription.
The hologram focused on text carved beneath the statue. Even through the translation matrix, the meaning was clear, the great warrior who covers her battle scars, but fate has other plans. Sarah's world tilted. She gripped the edge of the table, feeling the synthetic patches on her arms pull tight against her skin.
What does this mean?
Professor Kane moved closer, and, for the first time, Sarah noticed something familiar about the bone structure of his face, the set of his eyes. Captain Chen, I believe it means that this war, this entire conflict between humanity and the galactic civilizations, isn't what it appears to be.
I believe you're not who you think you are.
And I believe those scars you hide so carefully might be the key to saving not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. The Zephyrian ambassador spoke for the first time, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. There are legends among our people, Captain.
Ancient stories passed down from the time before time.
They speak of the marked ones, warriors from beyond the stars who would return when the galaxy faced its darkest hour. Warriors whose scars told the story of battles fought not for conquest, but for redemption. General Throckmore's massive voice rumbled through the room.
My people also remember. We thought them myths, stories to frighten children and inspire warriors.
But the descriptions match perfectly.
Beings of incredible strength and endurance, marked by battles against enemies we could not comprehend, fighting wars on fronts we could not see.
Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor.
This is madness. I'm a soldier, nothing more.
I've been fighting in this war for 15 years, starting as a private and working my way up through blood and determination. Every scar I carry came from protecting human colonies, defending human ships, saving human lives. I know where each one came from because I was there when I got them.
Were you? Professor Kane asked quietly. Captain, when you close your eyes and think about your earliest memories of the war, what do you see? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. A strange feeling washed over her, as if she was trying to remember a dream that kept slipping away. The Battle of Kepler 442b. That was my first major engagement. And, before that? Basic training on Mars. Combat school on Europa. And, before that? Sarah frowned, searching her memory. There should have been childhood memories, family, a home world.
But, when she reached for them, she found only shadows and pain.
I don't. I remember the academy. I remember wanting to protect people. Captain, Admiral Harrison said gently, we've reviewed your service record. It's exemplary, but it's also oddly incomplete. No family records, no birth certificate, no childhood medical history.
You appeared in our system 15 years ago as if you'd always been there, and no one questioned it because you were exactly what we needed when we needed it most. The room began to spin. Sarah reached out to steady herself, and her hand knocked against the holographic projector's control panel.
The image changed, cycling through dozens of carved reliefs from the ancient ruins.
And, in every one, she saw herself. Not similar figures, not analogous warriors, but exact representations of her own face, her own posture, her own scars arranged in patterns she'd never shared with anyone.
This is impossible, she breathed.
Professor Kane stepped closer, and she could see compassion in his strange, almost human eyes.
Captain, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. When you're wounded in battle, how long does it take you to heal? Sarah's mouth went dry.
She'd never thought about it before, had always attributed her rapid recovery to good medical care and human resilience. But, now, forced to consider it directly, she realized the truth was far stranger.
A few hours. Sometimes less. And how do you feel when you're fighting? Really fighting, not just following orders but truly engaged in battle? Again, the answer came without conscious thought. Like I'm remembering something. Like I'm doing what I was born to do. Captain, Kane said softly, what if I told you that you weren't born? What if I told you that you're something far older and far more important than a human soldier? What if I told you that your scars aren't just marks of battles past, but a map to humanity's future? The questions hit her like physical blows.
Sarah stumbled backward, her carefully maintained composure cracking.
Stop. Just stop. I don't care what your ruins say or what your legends claim. I know who I am.
But, even as she said it, doubt crept in. The patches covering her scars felt suddenly heavy, like lies made manifest. She thought of all the times she'd survived what should have been fatal injuries, all the times she'd accomplished the impossible, all the times other beings had looked at her with something approaching religious awe. The coalition has made a decision, Ambassador Zeltar announced, his skin pattern shifting to formal communication mode. These ruins, this discovery, changes everything. If Captain Chen truly is one of the marked ones from legend, if she carries within her scars the knowledge our ancestors spoke of, then humanity's status in this galaxy must be reconsidered.
Admiral Harrison leaned forward eagerly. You're offering humanity a place in the coalition?
More than that, General Thought-More rumbled.
If the legends are true, if this warrior carries the marks of the ancient battles, then humanity may not be seeking membership in our alliance. We may be seeking protection from yours.
Sarah felt the walls of the briefing room closing in around her. She looked down at her hands, imagining she could see the scars beneath the synthetic patches. Each one a mystery now, each one a question she'd never thought to ask. Who had she really been fighting? What battles had marked her so thoroughly that alien civilizations had carved her image in stone 50,000 years ago? I need time to think, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Time is something we may not have, Professor Kane replied.
Captain, the enemy fleet that's been advancing through the outer systems?
We don't think they're here to conquer human space.
We think they're here to find you.
And, when they do, everyone you've spent 15 years protecting might discover that their greatest defender was never really human at all. The meeting ended in chaos, with demands for more information, heated exchanges between the coalition representatives and human command staff, and emergency protocols being activated throughout the fleet.
But Sarah heard none of it.
She was already moving, walking through corridors that suddenly felt alien and familiar at the same time, heading for the one place on the ship where she might find answers. Her quarters felt different now, tainted by revelation and doubt. She stood before the mirror again, but this time, instead of applying patches, she began removing them. One by one, her carefully hidden scars were revealed. And, as each patch fell away, she began to see patterns she'd never noticed before. The scar from Kepler 442b didn't look like a plasma burn anymore. It looked like script, like writing in a language she almost recognized. The cluster of marks from the Titan engagement formed symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning just beyond her comprehension. And the great scar across her back, the one she'd told herself came from falling debris during the siege of New Geneva, looked exactly like the central inscription from the ancient ruins. Sarah stared at her reflection, seeing herself clearly for the first time in 15 years. She was a living document, a walking library of information written in flesh and pain.
But information about what? And written by whom?
Outside her quarters, the ship's emergency klaxons began to sound. Through her porthole, she could see lights in the darkness of space, moving in formation toward the human fleet.
The enemy had arrived, just as Professor Kane had predicted.
But, as Sarah watched the approaching ships, she felt something stirring within her that had nothing to do with human military training or strategic thinking. It was deeper, older, like a song she'd forgotten she knew the words to. Her scars began to itch, not with pain but with anticipation, as if they were trying to tell her something vital about the battle to come. She was about to discover that the war she'd been fighting for 15 years was merely the opening movement of a symphony that had been playing for 50 millennia. And she was both its most important note and its primary composer, even if she couldn't remember writing a single bar. The emergency klaxons continued their urgent wailing as Sarah stepped onto the bridge of the Defiance. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos, officers manning their stations while Admiral Harrison coordinated the fleet's defensive positions. Through the massive viewscreen, she could see them approaching, ships unlike anything in the Coalition database. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics, their hulls appearing to shift and flow like living metal. "Captain Chen, thank God you're here," Admiral Harrison called out without taking his eyes off the tactical display.
"We've got 37 contacts, unknown configuration, moving in perfect formation.
They're not responding to any communication attempts, and their energy signatures are off the charts." Sarah moved to the tactical station, her trained eye taking in the fleet deployment. The human ships were arranged in a defensive perimeter, with coalition vessels providing support from the flanks. It was a textbook formation, designed to maximize firepower while protecting the more vulnerable vessels. But something about it felt wrong to her, like a strategy designed to fight the wrong kind of war. "Their movement pattern," she said, studying the approaching ships.
"It's not a standard attack formation."
Lieutenant Commander Torres, the tactical officer, looked up from his displays.
"You're right, ma'am. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were positioning themselves for a ceremonial approach." "Ceremonial?"
Admiral Harrison turned to face her.
"What kind of enemy performs ceremonies before battle?" Sarah didn't answer because she didn't know how to explain the certainty growing in her mind. The approaching ships weren't preparing for conquest or destruction.
They were preparing for something else entirely, something that made her scars tingle with recognition even as her conscious mind struggled to understand. Professor Kane appeared at her shoulder, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling.
"Captain, may I suggest we try something unconventional?"
"Such as?"
"Let me communicate with them."
"Not through standard communication channels, but through the Coalition's deep space archaeological frequency."
"It's designed for contacting ancient automated systems in ruins like the ones we discovered." Admiral Harrison looked skeptical. "You think these ships are automated?"
"No," Kane replied, his strange eyes fixed on Sarah. "But I think they might respond to signals that resonate with the same civilization that built those ruins. The civilization that worshipped a human warrior covered in battle scars." Before anyone could object, Sarah stepped forward. "Do it." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant sound of the approaching fleet. Kane moved to the communication station and began entering a complex sequence of commands. The main screen flickered, displaying wavelengths and frequency patterns that looked more like art than science.
For several heartbeats, nothing happened.
Then, the response came, not through speakers or visual displays, but as a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull itself. Sarah felt it in her bones, in her scars, in places deeper than consciousness.
And, somehow, impossibly, she understood.
"They're not enemies," she said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty.
They're coming home." "Coming home?" Admiral Harrison demanded. "What does that mean?"
Sarah turned to face the bridge crew, and several officers took an involuntary step backward. Something in her expression had changed, becoming older and more distant, as if she was remembering things from a perspective that transcended her human identity.
"I need to speak with them directly," she said. "Face to face." "Absolutely not," Admiral Harrison responded immediately. "You're not boarding an unknown enemy vessel." "They're not enemy vessels," Sarah replied with infinite patience. "Admiral, I'm giving you a direct order.
Prepare a shuttle and clear me for departure."
"Captain, you're not in command of this fleet." "I can't allow Harrison." The single word carried such authority that the entire bridge fell silent.
Sarah looked at the Admiral with eyes that seemed to contain depths of experience far beyond her apparent age.
"Trust me. If I'm wrong, you can court-martial me when this is over. If I'm right, and you prevent me from going, everyone in this fleet dies within the hour."
The certainty in her voice was absolute, carrying the weight of battles fought across eons.
Admiral Harrison stared at her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly.
"Prepare Shuttle Bay 3. Captain Chen will have an escort of no escort," Sarah interrupted.
"I go alone." "Captain, that's completely against protocol."
"Protocol won't matter if these ships decide we're hostile." She moved toward the exit, then paused.
"Professor Kane, you're with me. I think you understand more about this situation than you've let on."
Kane nodded without surprise, as if he'd been expecting the request. Together, they headed for the shuttle bay, leaving behind a bridge full of confused and concerned officers. The shuttle bay hummed with activity as technicians prepared a small courier vessel for launch. Sarah changed into a standard flight suit, but this time she didn't apply her synthetic patches. Let her scars show. Something deep in her mind insisted it was important, necessary even. "You know what's happening here, don't you?" she asked Kane as they performed the pre-flight check. "I suspect," he replied carefully.
"Captain, may I ask you something personal?"
"Go ahead."
"Do you dream?"
The question caught her off guard.
"Of course I dream. Everyone dreams." "What do you dream about?"
Sarah paused in her systems check, realizing she'd never really considered the question seriously.
"Battles. Fighting in places I've never been against enemies I don't recognize."
"Sometimes I dream about teaching warriors how to fight, showing them techniques that don't exist in any human combat manual."
"And, in these dreams, how do you look?"
The answer came without thought.
"Covered in scars.
More scars than I have now, arranged in patterns that tell stories about wars fought across the galaxy." She stopped, staring at Kane.
"Why are you asking me this?" "Because, Captain Chen, I don't think they're dreams. I think they're memories."
Before she could respond, the shuttle bay doors opened to reveal the starfield beyond. The approaching fleet was visible now without magnification, their ships beautiful and terrible in their alien grandeur. Sarah felt a pull toward them that transcended logic or strategic thinking.
It was recognition, pure and simple.
The shuttle launched smoothly, carrying them across the void between the two fleets. As they approached the lead ship, Sarah could see that it was even stranger up close. The hull seemed to be made of a material that shifted between states, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes flowing like liquid metal, sometimes seeming to contain depths that suggested interior spaces larger than the exterior dimensions could accommodate. "Fascinating," Kane murmured, studying the sensor readings. "Their technology appears to operate on principles that shouldn't be possible according to current physics."
"Current physics according to whom?" Sarah asked absently, her attention focused on something she couldn't quite name.
The scars on her arms were beginning to warm, not with pain but with a tingling sensation that felt like recognition.
A docking port opened in the alien ship's hull, though neither Sarah nor Kane had requested permission to board.
The port was perfectly sized for their shuttle, as if the ship had known exactly what kind of vessel they would arrive in. "They're expecting us," Kane observed.
"They're expecting me," Sarah corrected.
The shuttle settled into the docking port with barely a vibration, and Sarah was surprised to find that the ship's atmosphere was perfectly compatible with human physiology.
More than compatible, actually.
The air felt somehow more real than the recycled atmosphere of human ships, carrying scents and subtleties that made her lungs feel like they were tasting home for the first time. The corridor beyond the airlock was vast, with walls that seemed to be carved from single pieces of some crystalline material. Light emanated from the walls themselves rather than from fixtures, casting no shadows and somehow managing to illuminate everything perfectly without creating glare. "The architecture is familiar," Kane noted, running his hand along the wall. "Similar to the ruins we discovered, but this is clearly the living version of that civilization." They walked deeper into the ship, following a path that seemed to lead them forward without any conscious navigation on their part. Sarah realized that she knew where they were going, though she couldn't have explained how. The knowledge felt like muscle memory, like following a route she'd walked countless times before. The corridor opened into a chamber that took her breath away. It was enormous, with a domed ceiling that somehow contained a view of swirling galaxies and nebulae. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that made Sarah's heart stop. It was human, or had once been human. Tall and imposing, with features that were handsome in a timeless way. But what drew her attention were the scars, intricate patterns that covered every visible inch of skin, telling stories in a language that spoke directly to her soul. The being's eyes, when they turned to regard her, held depths of experience that made eternity seem like a brief moment. "Hello, sister," the figure said, speaking in perfect English with a voice that carried harmonics of joy and sorrow.
"It's time you remembered who you really are."
Sarah felt her knees go weak. The scarred being stepped closer, and she could see that the patterns on his skin were moving, shifting like living script that rewrote itself as she watched. "I'm not your sister," she managed, though the words felt wrong as she spoke them.
"I don't know who you are."
"My name was Marcus, before I became something else. Before I became the chronicler of wars, the keeper of battles, the one who records victory and defeat in flesh and memory." He gestured to the scars covering his body. "And you are Sarah, though that's not the name you wore when we first took up arms against the Devourers."
"Devourers?"
"The enemy that threatens not just this galaxy, but all galaxies.
The force that consumes civilizations, absorbs their knowledge, and leaves nothing but empty space in its wake."
Marcus moved closer, and Sarah could see that his scars were indeed alive, writing and rewriting themselves in real time.
"We've been fighting them for 50,000 years, Sarah.
We and others like us, warriors created from the essence of fallen heroes to stand guard against the darkness."
Kane stepped forward, his expression one of scientific fascination mixed with awe. "You're saying that Captain Chan is some kind of artificial being?"
"Not artificial," Marcus corrected.
"Refined. Distilled.
She's what becomes of a soul that chooses to fight beyond death, that accepts transformation into something greater in order to protect those who cannot protect themselves." He looked at Sarah with eyes full of ancient affection. "She volunteered, as I did."
"As all of us did." "All of us?"
Sarah whispered.
"There are 12 of us, scattered across the galaxy.
12 warriors who carry the scars of every battle fought against the Devourers, who serve as both weapon and warning."
"You've been sleeping, sister."
"Living a human life, fighting human wars, because the greater conflict had gone quiet. But now they're returning, and you need to remember what you really are."
Sarah's mind reeled.
Images flashed through her consciousness, battles on a scale that dwarfed anything in her human memory. She saw herself standing against creatures of living shadow that devoured stars for sustenance. She remembered falling in battle after battle, only to rise again marked by new scars that told the story of each defeat and victory. The patches, she breathed. "I've been covering them because they were trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear."
"Your scars are a map, Sarah.
A tactical database written in flesh that contains everything we've learned about the Devourer's weaknesses, their strategies, their ultimate goal. When you're fully awakened, when you allow yourself to read the stories your own body tells, you'll have access to 50 millennia of accumulated battle knowledge. Marcus gestured to the walls of the chamber, and they began to display images. Star systems being consumed by clouds of darkness. Civilizations that had lasted for millions of years snuffed out in moments. And then, other images, showing figures like Sarah and Marcus standing against the tide, their scarred bodies blazing with power as they fought to hold the line. The coalition species, the humans, everyone in this galaxy exists because we've been standing guard, Marcus continued. But we can't do it alone anymore. The Devourers have learned, adapted, grown stronger. They're coming in force this time, and 12 warriors won't be enough. What are you saying? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. I'm saying it's time for the marked ones to stop hiding. Time for us to reveal ourselves to the galaxy and prepare every species, every world, every being capable of fighting for the war that will determine whether consciousness continues to exist in this universe. Kane had been recording everything on his portable scanner, his scientific mind trying to process information that transcended normal understanding. The ruins we found, they were left as a message? A warning, Marcus confirmed. And a promise. That when the darkness returned, the marked ones would return as well. He looked at Sarah with infinite compassion. But only if they chose to remember who they really are. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. She could see two paths stretching out before her. One led back to her shuttle, back to her human identity, back to a life of hidden scars and small battles. The other led into something vast and terrible and necessary, an existence of cosmic responsibility that would transform not just her but everyone who depended on her protection. If I do this, she said slowly, if I accept what you're telling me, what happens to the Saracen who's been fighting for humanity for 15 years? She becomes part of something larger, Marcus replied gently. She doesn't disappear, but she grows beyond the boundaries of a single identity. The love you feel for your human comrades, the dedication you've shown to protecting the innocent, those things become magnified across galactic scales. And if I refuse? Marcus's expression grew sad. Then, you return to your fleet, and, in approximately 6 hours, the Devourer Vanguard arrives in this system. Your human ships last perhaps 10 minutes before they're consumed utterly. The Coalition fleet lasts longer, maybe an hour. And then, the Devourers move on to the next system, and the next, until this entire galaxy is nothing but empty space and absorbed memories. Sarah looked down at her hands, at the scars visible on her arms where her flight suit had pulled back. For the first time in 15 years, she really studied them, trying to read the stories they told. And, slowly, gradually, she began to understand. Each scar wasn't just a mark of damage. Each one was a lesson, a tactical insight, a piece of strategic information. Together, they formed a database of knowledge about an enemy so vast and patient that it measured campaigns in geological time. But they also contained something else, something that made her heart race with possibility. Hope. Every scar also carried a memory of victory, of battles won against impossible odds, of moments when the light had pushed back the darkness just a little further. Sister, Marcus said softly, what do you choose? Sarah looked up at him, her decision already made. The woman who had hidden her scars for 15 years was about to let them tell their stories to the galaxy. And those stories, written in flesh and pain and hope, were going to teach everyone within 100 light-years how to fight for their lives. I choose to remember, she said, and, as the words left her mouth, the scars covering her body began to glow with soft, silver light. The transformation had begun. The transformation began as a whisper in Sarah's bones and became a symphony of awakening that resonated through every cell of her being. The silver light emanating from her scars spread across her skin like liquid starlight, revealing patterns and stories that had been waiting 50,000 years to be read again. She felt her consciousness expanding, memories flooding back like a dam bursting after millennia of pressure. She remembered her first death, on a world whose name was lost to time, fighting creatures that consumed hope itself. She remembered choosing to return, to accept the transformation that would make her into something more and less than human. She remembered Marcus at her side through battles that spanned eons, and the faces of 10 other warriors whose names and scars were as familiar as her own breath. "Professor Kane," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there moments before, "you need to return to the fleet immediately.
Tell Admiral Harrison that Captain Chen is dead.
Tell him that what stands in her place is something older and more dangerous, but ultimately on his side." Kane stared at her in fascination rather than fear. The glow from her scars had stabilized into a soft radiance that made her appear almost ethereal, but her eyes held depths of experience that spoke of battles beyond mortal comprehension.
"What do I tell him is happening out here?" "The truth. That humanity is about to learn they're not alone in the universe, and that their survival depends on accepting help from beings they'll struggle to understand." Sarah turned to Marcus, and Kane could see recognition passing between them, the comfortable familiarity of comrades who had fought together across cosmic time. "How long do we have?"
"The vanguard will arrive in 5 hours and 37 minutes, Marcus replied. "The main force is approximately 6 days behind them. If we can defeat the vanguard decisively, we buy time to prepare proper defenses."
"And our siblings?" "Awakening as we speak.
The signal you sent when you accepted your true nature has reached them all.
By the time the main Devourer force arrives, all 12 marked ones will be active and ready." Kane struggled to process what he was hearing.
"Excuse me, but 12 warriors against a galactic threat? Even if you're as powerful as these legends suggest, that seems..."
Sarah looked at him with something like amusement. "Professor, we're not going to fight them alone.
We're going to teach every species in this galaxy how to fight them effectively. The scars we carry contain 50,000 years of accumulated tactical knowledge about the Devourer's weaknesses, their patterns, their limitations. But, more than that," Marcus added, "our presence changes the fundamental nature of the conflict. The Devourers don't just consume matter and energy, they consume consciousness itself. They feed on the despair and fear of dying civilizations. But, when the marked ones take the field, when beings see warriors who have died 1,000 deaths and returned each time stronger, despair becomes hope.
Fear becomes determination.
We're psychological warfare made manifest," Sarah continued.
"Living proof that death isn't the end, that consciousness can transcend physical limitations, that no enemy is truly unstoppable. When people see us fight, they remember that they have something worth fighting for."
Kane nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn.
"You're not just weapons.
You're symbols." "We're both," Sarah replied. "But, right now, I need you to return to the fleet and convince them to trust what they're about to see. Because in approximately 10 minutes, I'm going to demonstrate capabilities that will challenge everything they think they know about physics, biology, and the nature of consciousness itself." As if summoned by her words, the chamber around them began to shift and change.
The walls became transparent, revealing the vast fleet of alien ships arranged in perfect formation around them.
And, beyond them, barely visible at the edge of sensor range, Kane could see shadows moving through space itself. "The Vanguard scouts," Marcus observed. "They're early." Sarah studied the approaching darkness with eyes that held knowledge of 100 similar encounters.
3 consumption-class vessels, 12 harvester escorts, and something I haven't seen before. "Show me."
The chamber's displays enhanced the distant shapes, revealing ships that seemed to absorb light itself. But, among them moved something new, a vessel that appeared to be constructed entirely from crystallized screams and fossilized terror. Just looking at it made Kane's mind recoil in instinctive horror. "A pain engine," Sarah breathed, her expression growing grim.
"They're testing new weapons."
"That ship doesn't just consume matter and energy, it feeds on suffering itself. The more terror its presence generates, the stronger it becomes." "I need to return to the fleet immediately," Kane said, understanding the urgency.
"Yes.
And, when you get there, tell them exactly what you saw here.
No matter how insane it sounds, tell them the truth.
Their lives depend on them understanding that the rules have changed." Kane hurried back toward the shuttle, his mind racing with implications. As the airlock sealed behind him, he caught one last glimpse of Sarah and Marcus through the chamber's transparent walls. They were moving toward what appeared to be an armory, their scarred forms glowing with increasing intensity as they prepared for battle. The shuttle's return journey to the human fleet felt both eternal and instantaneous. Kane watched through the viewports as the alien ships began to change configuration, their flowing hulls reshaping themselves into forms that were clearly designed for combat. But, rather than the chaotic violence he expected, their movements held a ceremonial quality, as if they were performing a ritual that had been refined over millennia. The Defiance welcomed him back with barely controlled panic. The ship's sensors had detected the approaching Devourer Vanguard, and Admiral Harrison was in the midst of coordinating evacuation protocols when Kane burst onto the bridge.
"Admiral, cancel the evacuation. We're not running from this fight."
"Professor, I don't think you understand the situation.
We're facing an enemy of unknown capability with technology that makes our best ships look like toys. The only sane response is strategic withdrawal."
"The only sane response," Kane replied firmly, "is to trust Captain Chan and prepare to learn tactics that will save this entire galaxy." Before Admiral Harrison could respond, every screen on the bridge flickered to life with an image that made the entire crew gasp in astonishment. Sarah stood in what appeared to be the bridge of the alien flagship, but she was no longer the woman they remembered. The scars covering her exposed skin glowed with silver light, forming patterns that shifted and moved like living text. Her eyes held depths of starlight, and, when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of cosmic authority.
"Fleet Command, this is the being you knew as Captain Sarah Chin.
I'm about to engage enemy forces using capabilities that will seem impossible. Do not interfere, do not attempt to assist, and do not assume I require rescue if things appear to go badly. What you're about to witness is the opening movement of a war that has been building for 50,000 years." "Captain," Admiral Harrison began, but Sarah cut him off with a look that made him step backward involuntarily.
"I am no longer Captain Chen, Admiral."
"That woman was a mask, a disguise that let me live among you until the time came to reveal my true nature. My name is Scarsong, the marked one who carries the memory of every battle fought against the Devourers. Watch, and learn, and prepare your people for truths that will challenge everything they believe about the nature of existence."
The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Through the main view screen, they could see the alien fleet beginning to move.
But, instead of advancing toward the Devourer Vanguard, the ship spread out in a formation that seemed to encompass the entire space around the human and coalition forces.
"They're not moving to attack," Lieutenant Commander Torres observed, studying the tactical displays. "It looks like they're positioning themselves to protect us."
"Protect us from what?"
Admiral Harrison demanded.
His question was answered moments later as space itself seemed to tear open at the edge of the system. The Devourer Vanguard emerged from what appeared to be a wound in reality, their dark hulls absorbing light and creating zones of absolute darkness that hurt to look at directly. The pain engine moved among them like a predator, its crystallized scream hull pulsing with malevolent energy that made every person on the human ships feel a sudden, inexplicable terror. "All ships, battle stations," Admiral Harrison ordered, falling back on training and procedure in the face of the incomprehensible. But, before any human or coalition vessel could so much as charge their weapons, something extraordinary happened. The alien fleet that had protected them suddenly wasn't there anymore. Not destroyed or vanished, but transformed into something else entirely. Where dozens of ships had been, now there was a single entity that defied description. It was part vessel, part living creature, part force of nature made manifest. At its heart, clearly visible despite the entity's impossible size, stood two figures whose scarred forms blazed with light bright enough to illuminate entire star systems. Sarah and Marcus had become something beyond individual existence while somehow remaining utterly themselves. Their combined essence had merged with their fleet, creating a weapon that operated on principles transcending known physics. When they moved toward the Devourer Vanguard, they didn't travel through space so much as reshape space around them. The first consumption-class vessel they encountered simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, but negated, removed from reality as if it had never been. The Harvester escorts fared no better, their ability to consume matter and energy proving useless against enemies who existed partially outside normal spacetime. But the pain engine was different. When Sarah and Marcus engaged it, the crystallized screams that formed its hull began to resonate with terrible harmony. The entity feeding on terror and suffering had found opponents who had experienced more pain than any beings in galactic history, and that pain was being transformed into something the Devourers had never encountered before.
Hope made manifest. Suffering transformed into strength. Death transformed into determination. The battle that followed couldn't be described in conventional terms because it wasn't really happening in conventional space.
Sarah and Marcus fought the pain engine on metaphysical levels, their scars becoming weapons that cut through the fabric of despair itself. Every wound they had ever received became a lesson in how to endure. Every death they had suffered became proof that consciousness could transcend physical limitations. On the bridge of the Defiance, Kane watched in awe as abstract concepts became visible forces. The crew could see hope literally battling despair, watch as determination grappled with entropy, witness the transformation of pain into power on a scale that made galactic warfare seem trivial.
"My God," Admiral Harrison whispered. "What are they?"
"They're what we become," Kane replied, understanding flooding through him as he watched the cosmic battle unfold. "They're what happens when someone chooses to fight beyond death, to transform suffering into protection for others. They're the answer to every parent who ever wondered if their children would be safe, to every soldier who ever asked if their sacrifice meant something." The pain engine, for all its terrible power, was unprepared for opponents who could transform its primary weapon into fuel for their own strength. The more terror it projected, the more determined Sarah and Marcus became. The more suffering it tried to inflict, the more they remembered everyone they had ever protected and everyone they had yet to save.
In the end, the pain engine didn't die so much as transform. Its crystallized screams became crystallized songs of defiance. Its fossilized terror became fossilized hope.
And, when the transformation was complete, it joined the combined entity that Sarah and Marcus had become, adding its power to theirs. The remaining Devourer vessels fled, tearing new wounds in space as they escaped to whatever dark realm had spawned them. But they left behind something they had never left before: witnesses. Beings who had seen their seemingly unstoppable forces not just defeated, but transformed into weapons against them. As the immediate threat passed, the combined entity that was Sarah, Marcus, and their captured foe began to separate back into individual components.
The alien fleet reformed, the pain engine now gleaming with silver light instead of crystallized darkness.
And, at the center of it all, Sarah and Marcus stood once again as distinct beings, though their connection to each other and to the forces they commanded remained visible in the patterns of their ever-shifting scars. "Admiral Harrison," Sarah's voice came through the communication systems, carrying harmonics that spoke directly to the soul, "I need to speak with every commanding officer in this fleet. It's time they understood exactly what they're going to be fighting, and why the survival of consciousness itself depends on them learning to fight in ways they never imagined possible." As emergency conferences were hastily arranged and coalition representatives demanded explanations that challenged their understanding of reality, one thing had become clear to everyone present: the war they thought they had been fighting was about to become something infinitely larger and more dangerous. But it was also going to become something infinitely more hopeful, because they now knew that even death itself could be transformed into a weapon for the protection of life. And, in a universe where cosmic horrors fed on despair, that knowledge was the most powerful weapon of all. The Emergency Joint Conference convened in the largest assembly hall aboard the Coalition flagship Eternal Harmony, a massive vessel designed to accommodate the varied atmospheric and gravitational needs of dozens of species. Representatives from every major civilization in the sector gathered, their faces displaying the universal expression of beings trying to process information that challenged the fundamental nature of their reality. Sarah stood at the center of the circular chamber, no longer making any attempt to hide her true nature. The scars covering her body glowed with soft silver light, their patterns shifting and changing as if responding to her thoughts and emotions. Beside her, Marcus maintained a respectful distance while remaining clearly connected to her through bonds that transcended normal understanding. Admiral Harrison sat with the human delegation, his expression cycling between amazement, confusion, and a growing understanding that his entire worldview was being reconstructed in real time. Professor Kane sat nearby, frantically taking notes on a portable recording device that seemed inadequate for documenting the transformation of galactic civilization. "Representatives of the Coalition," Sarah began, her voice carrying harmonics that translated perfectly into every language present, 6 days from now, the main Devourer fleet will arrive in this sector. Based on our observations of their vanguard, they're bringing approximately 50,000 vessels of various classifications, including weapons we've never encountered before. A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrians, his skin patterns flickering through rapid color changes that indicated extreme distress, spoke first.
50,000 ships? Our combined fleet's number perhaps 3,000 vessels. Even with your extraordinary capabilities, how can such numbers be countered?
They can't, Sarah replied bluntly.
Not through conventional warfare.
The Devourers have spent 50 millennia perfecting techniques for consuming entire civilizations. They know how to counter every weapon you possess, every tactic you've developed, every strategy your greatest military minds have conceived. General Thokmor's massive frame shifted uneasily, his rock-like features expressing the Kaldorian equivalent of concern.
Then, why aren't you advising immediate evacuation? Why gather us here to discuss certain defeat?
Because, Marcus interjected, stepping forward, conventional warfare isn't the only option available to you anymore. For 50,000 years, the Marked Ones have been learning not just how to fight the Devourers, but how to transform the very nature of conflict itself. Sarah gestured, and the chamber's holographic displays came alive with images that made several delegates gasp in recognition. Ancient ruins, archaeological sites that had puzzled xenoarchaeologists for generations, symbols and inscriptions that had never been successfully translated. Every species in this chamber has encountered remnants of our previous campaigns, Sarah continued. The ruins on Kepler 186f that the Zephyrians use as a spiritual pilgrimage site. The crystalline formations on New Kaldor that your engineers study but cannot replicate. The quantum resonance chambers on a dozen coalition worlds that generate energy through principles your scientists don't understand. You're saying these were left by your people? Asked Counselor Zirith of the Tentari Collective, her multiple vocal cords creating harmonics that expressed both awe and suspicion.
Left as teaching tools, Marcus confirmed.
Each site contains encoded information about Devourer weaknesses, about tactics that work against them, about ways to transform the fundamental nature of consciousness itself into a weapon they cannot consume. Admiral Harrison leaned forward, his military mind grappling with implications.
Are you saying you've been preparing us for this war without our knowledge? We've been giving you the tools, Sarah replied.
But the choice to use them has always been yours. The quantum resonance chambers, for example, don't just generate energy. When properly configured, they create fields that make matter and consciousness partially unbound from normal spacetime.
The Devourers can't consume what exists in quantum superposition.
Dr. Mariah Okonkwo, the human fleet's chief science officer, spoke up with barely contained excitement. The energy readings we've been getting from those chambers, the impossible efficiency ratings, the way they seem to violate conservation laws.
They don't violate anything, Marcus explained.
They operate on principles that transcend the limitations of single-universe physics. When consciousness becomes sufficiently refined through experience, it gains access to capabilities that seem impossible from a purely material perspective. Sarah moved to the center of the chamber, her scarred form commanding attention from every being present.
What I'm about to show you will be disturbing.
You're going to witness the transformation of several volunteers into something greater than their original forms. But understand that what you see is not death, not destruction, but evolution into a state of existence capable of standing against cosmic-level threats. Before anyone could object or ask for clarification, the chamber's atmosphere began to change. The air itself seemed to thicken with potential, and several sensitive species reported feeling as if reality had become more real around them. 3 figures entered the chamber, moving with the fluid grace that marked them as something beyond normal biological limitations. Sarah's expression brightened with genuine joy as she recognized her siblings, fellow Marked Ones who had awakened in response to her transformation. Thornscale, who carries the memory of every defensive strategy ever employed against the Devourers, she said, indicating a being whose scars formed intricate geometric patterns across skin that seemed to shift between organic and mineral states. Void Whisper, who learned to fight in the spaces between dimensions, she continued, gesturing to a figure whose scars appeared to contain actual depths, as if looking at them revealed glimpses of other realities. And Starforge, who discovered how to transform matter itself into weapons the Devourers cannot counter, she concluded, indicating a being whose scars glowed with the light of miniature stars. The 3 newcomers moved to stand with Sarah and Marcus, their combined presence creating a field of potential that made the air sing with barely contained energy. Together, they represented over 200,000 years of accumulated battle experience against enemies that consumed civilizations for sustenance. The demonstration we're about to perform, Sarah announced, will show you how ordinary beings can be transformed into forces capable of transcendent combat. But, understand that this transformation is always voluntary, always chosen, never forced.
Professor Kane stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. I volunteer.
Kane, no, Admiral Harrison protested.
We don't know what this will do to you.
Actually, I think I do know, Kane replied, his strange almost human features displaying a certainty that surprised everyone present.
I've known since I first saw those ruins. I've known since I first met Captain Chen. Professor Kane wasn't my real name any more than Sarah Chen was hers.
Sarah studied him with eyes that seemed to peer directly into his soul.
What was your real name, brother?
Truthkeeper, he replied, and, as he spoke the word, his appearance began to shift. The subtle alienness of his features became more pronounced, his skin taking on a texture that suggested experiences beyond normal existence. I carry the memory of every truth discovered about the Devourers, every weakness uncovered, every lie they've told themselves about their supposed inevitability. Scars began to appear on Truthkeeper's skin, not forming as if from injury but manifesting as if they had always been there and were only now becoming visible. Each scar told a story about knowledge gained through pain, understanding earned through sacrifice, wisdom purchased with suffering that transcended individual existence. The assembled delegates watched in fascinated horror as Truthkeeper's transformation completed itself. When it finished, he stood as one of the marked ones, his scarred form blazing with the same silver radiance that marked his siblings.
6 of us, awakened and ready, Sarah announced. 6 more are awakening across the galaxy as we speak.
When all 12 are active, we'll have access to the complete database of everything learned about the Devourers across 50 millennia of conflict.
But, we cannot win this war alone, Marcus continued.
The Devourers have evolved as well, developed new capabilities, created weapons specifically designed to counter the tactics we've used against them before. Victory requires not just the marked ones, but transformed civilizations fighting alongside us.
Counselor Ziritha's multiple voices created complex harmonics as she spoke. What exactly are you asking of us?
We're asking you to choose evolution over extinction, Sarah replied.
To accept transformation into forms capable of transcendent conflict. To become more than you are in order to protect everything you value. And, if we refuse? General Thakmore demanded.
Then, in 6 days, your civilizations become memories preserved only in our scars, Void Whisper spoke for the first time, her voice carrying echoes from spaces between realities. The Devourers will consume everything you are, everything you've built, everything you might have become. Your entire legacy will be reduced to patterns of absorbed consciousness inside creatures that exist to unmake reality itself.
The chamber fell silent as the magnitude of the choice became clear. Evolution or extinction. Transformation or consumption. Transcendence or obliteration.
Admiral Harrison stood slowly, his face reflecting the weight of decision.
What would this transformation involve? Pain, Thornscale replied honestly. More pain than most beings can imagine surviving.
Death and rebirth on levels that transcend biological processes. The complete reconstruction of your understanding of what consciousness is and what it can become. But, also power, Starforge added. The ability to reshape matter with focused will. The capability to exist partially outside normal spacetime. The strength to stand against cosmic threats and protect everyone who cannot protect themselves. And purpose, Sarah concluded. Knowledge that your existence matters on scales that encompass entire galaxies. The understanding that consciousness itself is the greatest force in the universe, and that you've been chosen to serve as its defender. The delegates began urgent discussions among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of decision that filled the chamber. Species that had been allies for centuries found themselves debating the fundamental nature of existence. Civilizations that had spent millennia developing their cultures faced the possibility of transformation into something entirely beyond their current understanding. Dr. Okonkwo raised her hand, her scientific mind already racing with possibilities.
The volunteers for transformation, would they retain their original personalities and memories?
Enhanced versions of them, Truthkeeper replied. Everything you are becomes amplified, refined, focused toward the protection of consciousness throughout the universe.
You become more yourself, not less. How many volunteers would be required? Admiral Harrison asked, his strategic mind already calculating possibilities.
From each species, perhaps 1,000 individuals, Marcus replied.
Enough to form the core of transcendent forces capable of coordinating with conventional military units.
The Marked Ones serve as field commanders, but we need transformed beings to serve as the interface between cosmic-level capabilities and standard military operations. The discussions continued for hours, with representatives debating not just the immediate tactical situation but the long-term implications of accepting transformation. They were being asked to voluntarily evolve their species, to take steps toward becoming something beyond their current existence. But, as the debates raged, sensor alerts began sounding throughout the Coalition fleet. Long-range detection systems were picking up distortions at the edge of the galaxy, massive disruptions in spacetime that could only mean one thing. The main Devourer fleet had begun its approach. And it was larger than anyone had dared to imagine. Representatives, Sarah announced, her voice cutting through all discussion, the time for debate has ended. In 4 days, this sector will become the primary battleground for the survival of consciousness itself. Whatever choices you make them quickly. The enemy that destroyed 100,000 civilizations is coming, and they're bringing weapons designed specifically to counter everything we've learned about fighting them. As emergency alerts began sounding throughout the assembled fleets, one thing became clear to everyone present. The war that would determine whether consciousness continued to exist in the universe was about to begin, and the choices made in the next few hours would determine not just who survived, but what form survival would take. 3 days remained until the Devourer fleet reached the outer system, and the space around the Coalition staging area had transformed into something that defied conventional description. What had begun as a gathering of traditional military vessels had evolved into a fusion of technology and transcendent consciousness that represented the greatest collective effort in galactic history. The volunteers had come forward in numbers that surprised even the Marked Ones. From every species, from every world, beings had chosen transformation over conventional existence. The process was exactly as painful as promised, and exactly as magnificent. Admiral Harrison had been among the first, his human determination translating into scars that told stories of strategic brilliance refined through cosmic perspective.
Dr.
Okonkwo's scientific curiosity had become something approaching omniscience within her specialized fields, her transformed consciousness capable of understanding principles that connected quantum mechanics to the fundamental nature of awareness itself. Sarah stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Defiance but was now something that existed simultaneously as a starship, a living entity, and a focusing lens for the collective will of transformed humanity. Around her, the combined fleet had undergone similar metamorphoses, their hulls flowing with patterns that mirrored the scars of their awakened crews. Sister, Marcus approached, his own transformation having deepened over the past few days. Where once his scars had been static records of past battles, they now moved with active strategic planning, displaying real-time tactical information about the approaching enemy.
The final 3 have awakened.
Sarah felt a surge of completion as her consciousness connected with the newly awakened Marked Ones. Solrend, who carried the memory of every psychological weapon the Devourers had ever employed. Eternal Bind, who had learned to create unbreakable connections between conscious beings across any distance. And Hopekindle, whose specialty was transforming despair into determination on planetary scales. All 12 Marked Ones were now active, their combined consciousness forming a strategic intelligence that spanned 50,000 years of accumulated knowledge. But, more than that, they were connected to the thousands of newly transformed beings throughout the Coalition fleet, creating a network of enhanced consciousness that operated on principles the Devourers had never encountered. The enemy fleet has reached the edge of the heliosphere, reported Admiral Harrison, his enhanced perception allowing him to sense the approaching threat across impossible distances. 300,000 vessels, configurations we've never seen before. They're not just bringing consumption ships, Sarah. They're bringing reality alteration engines, consciousness absorption matrices, weapons designed to unmake the fundamental forces that allow awareness to exist. Sarah nodded, her scarred form blazing with silver light as she accessed the collective knowledge of her siblings.
They've been preparing for this encounter as long as we have. They know about the Marked Ones, know about our capabilities. This fleet represents their answer to 50,000 years of our interference with their feeding patterns.
Dr. Okonkwo's transformed voice carried harmonics that spoke directly to the quantum foundations of matter itself.
I'm detecting something else, something that shouldn't be possible. They're bringing consciousness inverters, devices that transform awareness itself into fuel for entropy. If they activate those weapons,
every thinking being in the galaxy becomes a battery for universal destruction, completed Truthkeeper, his scarred features grave with the weight of knowledge.
They're not just trying to consume this civilization. They're attempting to transform consciousness itself into a weapon against existence.
The magnitude of the threats settled over the assembled forces like a shadow that encompassed entire star systems. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a conflict that would determine whether awareness, thought, hope, and love could continue to exist anywhere in the universe. All commanders, prepare for final strategic briefing, Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the transformed fleet through connections that transcended normal communication. What we're about to attempt has never been tried before. We're going to fight a war on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The briefing took place in a space that existed partially outside normal dimensions, allowing beings from across the fleet to participate regardless of their physical location. The assembled commanders represented the greatest collection of military intelligence in galactic history, their enhanced consciousnesses capable of processing strategic information on scales that encompassed entire civilizations. The enemy's primary advantage, Sarah began, displaying tactical information through patterns of light that wrote themselves across the scars of every participant, is their ability to exist partially outside normal spacetime while maintaining full combat effectiveness. They can attack from angles that don't exist, retreat into dimensions we can't follow, and coordinate their actions through communication methods that ignore the speed of light. However, Marcus continued, our transformation has given us capabilities they've never encountered. We can match their dimensional flexibility while maintaining something they lack entirely, the ability to create rather than merely consume. Starforge stepped forward, her form blazing with the light of miniature supernovas.
The plan requires us to transform this entire star system into a weapon.
Not by destroying it, but by evolving it into a state of existence that becomes actively hostile to entropy.
The concept was staggering in its scope.
They were proposing to elevate matter, energy, space, and time itself into a state of enhanced existence that would make the very fabric of reality an ally in their fight against cosmic destruction. The transformation process will require every enhanced consciousness in the fleet to maintain focus simultaneously, explained Void Whisper, her scarred form flickering between dimensions as she spoke. We'll be elevating billions of tons of matter into quantum superposition, creating a zone where thought becomes as real as physics, where will becomes as powerful as fundamental forces. Admiral Harrison's enhanced strategic mind immediately grasped the implications. You're creating a battlefield where the Devourer's advantages become liabilities.
They're designed to consume existing reality, not to fight against reality that actively resists consumption.
Exactly, confirmed Sarah.
But the process is irreversible. Once we begin this transformation, there's no returning to conventional existence.
This star system, everyone in it, everything we touch becomes permanently elevated beyond normal physical laws. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of a decision that would echo across cosmic history. They were being asked to voluntarily transcend the boundaries of conventional existence, to become something that had never existed before in the known universe.
Ma'am, spoke Captain Torres, his own transformation having enhanced his tactical perception to near-prophetic levels, what about the civilizations we're protecting? The billions of beings throughout the galaxy who haven't chosen transformation?
If we succeed, replied Hopekindle, her scarred form radiating the fundamental emotional force that drove conscious beings to fight against impossible odds, we create a template that can be replicated throughout the galaxy. Not forced transformation, but voluntary evolution for those who choose it. A network of enhanced consciousness that can stand guard against entropy forever.
And if we fail?
Then, consciousness ends, Sarah replied simply. Not just in this galaxy, but everywhere. The Devourer's new weapons don't just consume civilizations, they consume the possibility of consciousness itself. If they succeed here, they gain the ability to retroactively eliminate awareness from the universe's entire history.
The vote was unanimous.
Every enhanced being in the fleet shows transcendence over conventional existence, evolution over entropy, hope over despair. They would transform themselves and their environment into something the universe had never seen before, a civilization that existed partially outside normal reality while remaining connected to everything they were protecting. The transformation began at the molecular level and expanded outward at the speed of thought. Matter became conscious, energy developed will, space itself began to exhibit preferences for creation over destruction. The ships of the coalition fleet merged with their crews, becoming hybrid entities that were simultaneously technological marvels and living beings. Sarah felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of individual existence while somehow becoming more herself than she had ever been. Her scars became conduits for cosmic forces, her memories became accessible to every enhanced being in the system, her will became part of a collective determination that spanned dimensions. When the Devourer fleet arrived, they found something unprecedented in their 50,000-year history of cosmic consumption. They found a star system that fought back. The battle that followed couldn't be described in conventional terms because it wasn't happening in conventional space. It was a conflict between opposing philosophies made manifest, between entropy and evolution, between consumption and creation. The Devourers brought weapons designed to unmake reality itself, but found themselves fighting against reality that had become actively committed to its own existence. Sarah and her fellow Marked Ones served as focal points for the transformed consciousness of entire civilizations. Their scars became weapons that cut through the fabric of despair, their combined experience became tactical knowledge that anticipated enemy actions before they were conceived. The consciousness inverters, the enemy's ultimate weapons, found themselves inverting nothing. Instead of transforming awareness into fuel for destruction, they encountered awareness that transformed them into instruments of creation. The reality alteration engines discovered that reality was altering them in return, forcing them to become constructive rather than destructive. For the first time in cosmic history, the Devourers encountered something they couldn't consume, consciousness that had evolved beyond their ability to comprehend, let alone destroy. They retreated, but not before leaving behind something unprecedented in their entire existence: hope. Some of their vessels, touched by the transformed reality of the star system, began to exhibit behaviors that suggested they were remembering what they had been before becoming instruments of cosmic consumption. The possibility emerged that even the Devourers themselves might be capable of evolution rather than destruction. In the aftermath of the battle, as the immediate threat passed, the transformed beings of the coalition found themselves facing a new kind of existence. They were no longer bound by the limitations of conventional physics, but they remained connected to everything they had fought to protect. They had become guardians of consciousness itself, capable of protecting not just individual civilizations but the fundamental forces that allowed awareness to exist. Sarah stood in what had once been the observation deck of the Defiance, looking out at stars that now seemed like old friends. Her scars no longer told stories of past battles but glowed with active knowledge of how to protect the future. Around her, the transformed fleet maintained its watch, ready to respond to threats anywhere in the galaxy. Sister, Marcus joined her, his own scars blazing with satisfaction at a plan executed successfully across cosmic scales. The other sectors are reporting similar successes. Wherever Marked Ones have awakened, wherever beings have chosen transformation, the Devourers are encountering resistance they can't overcome. And the civilizations that chose not to transform? Protected by those who did. Free to continue existing as they choose, knowing that consciousness itself has guardians who transcend individual mortality. Marcus paused, studying the patterns of light flowing across his scarred arms. We become what we always hoped we could be, Sarah. Not just warriors, but shepherds of awareness itself. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settle around her like comfortable armor. Her scars, no longer hidden beneath synthetic patches, told the story of consciousness choosing to transcend its limitations in order to protect its own existence. But, more than that, they told the story of beings who had discovered that the universe's greatest force wasn't entropy or destruction, but the will of aware beings to protect each other across any distance, through any danger, for as long as existence itself endured. The great warrior who had covered her battle scars had finally allowed them to tell their stories. And those stories, written in flesh and light and transcendent determination, had become the foundation for a new kind of existence where consciousness itself served as the ultimate guardian against the dark. In the end, fate had indeed had other plans. Plans that involved not just survival, but evolution beyond the boundaries of what anyone had thought possible. And, at the center of it all, Sarah Chen had become exactly what she had always been, someone willing to sacrifice everything to protect those who needed protection. The only difference was that now, her sacrifice had elevated her beyond the need for sacrifice, into a realm where protection could be offered without loss, where strength could be shared without diminishment, where consciousness could guard itself across cosmic scales without losing the essential humanity that made it worth protecting. The war was won, not through destruction, but through transformation.
And the galaxy would never be the same.